I'm Jana Wong Healy, and I've been a film industry professional for years, having worked in development, production, and distribution for a variety of film studios and companies. I currently teach business communication at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business. I'm here with Stephen Gundel, a professor of film and television studies at the University of Warwick in the UK, a film historian and an expert on Italian cinema. His latest book, Fame Amid the Ruins, Italian Film Stardom in the Age of Neorealism, is now published and available for purchase. Today, we're talking about the star system. As you may know, the star system was developed by Hollywood studios in the 1920s to create and manage movie stars and to keep them under contract to their specific studio. Some believe this plan of developing stars emphasized the public persona over the individual's acting abilities. The studio heads and their PR departments were kept busy, keeping their charges in the press, and the stars themselves were contractually obligated to promote and protect those personas developed by the studios. Some familiar names that were part of the Hollywood studio system include Cary Grant, Marilyn Monroe, Joan Crawford, and Rock Hudson. So, let's get started. Stephen, after the neorealist films of the post-war years, Italian cinema was best known around the world for its beautiful female stars like Gina Lollobrigida and Sophia Loren. What role did Dino play in developing the star system?
Well, I think we have to take a step back and look at what Italian cinema did before the end of the war. And of course, Italy had a fascist regime headed by Mussolini, which invested a lot of resources in cinema and built up a national star system. So the first thing that film producers had to decide was that star system of any use in the post-war period? Were there any names and faces that carried a resonance that would work with the public in a completely changed context? And it must be said that most of the stars of the fascist period were very quickly forgotten. They were too bound up with that particular time. Not that they necessarily embodied the values of the regime, although some of them did, but their sort of faces and identities recalled a time that had come to an end. And of course, Italy gave rise at the end of the war to the movement of neorealism, which focused on the country's problems, the sufferings of ordinary people, the struggles that they'd faced. And that required a very different type of actor, not a polished studio performer, but a type of actor who could look like an ordinary person, who could indeed mingle with ordinary people. And one of the currents of neorealism was precisely about using ordinary people to play themselves. That's to say, not professional actors, but amateurs. Some of the most famous films of the post-war period, Bicycle Thieves, for example, include an ordinary worker playing the part of an ordinary worker who loses his bicycle and his job and so on. So for a producer like Dino De Laurentiis, in 1945-46, he had to think, well, how can I make films which appeal to an audience using the marketing power of star names? And what he did, the first significant film that he produced after the war was called The Bandit, and it was made in 1946. And what he did was bring together the one big star from the fascist period, Amedeo Nazzari, who was a sort of Italian Errol Flynn or Clark Gable, who was very, very popular, a versatile actor. He'd done military films, but also comedies and dramas, historical films, and so on. He paired Amedeo Nazzari with the great heroine of Rome Open City, Anna Magnani. Now, you would imagine these two were chalk and cheese, really. Nazzari was quite a theatrical performer in some respects, the exact opposite of an amateur. somebody who was very professional in his approach to filmmaking. He even wore his costumes for several weeks before shooting began to sort of wear them in, break them in, and so on. Anna Magnani was a theatre performer principally. She'd made a few films, but then burst onto the screen in Rome Open City, playing this sort of woman of the people who is shot down in the street. Rome Open City, of course, set during the Nazi occupation of Rome. And she became the face and the heroine of neorealism. So these two together, it didn't look as though it would work. And in fact, the director of that film said, no, not Nazzari. We can't possibly have him. And Dino said to him, come out with me into the street. And they took a picture of Nazzari and stopped people in the street, said, who's this? Who's this? And they all said, that's Amedeo Nazzari. So Dino said, we've got to have him. Everybody knows who he is. He can still go over with the audience, help a film in its marketing. So he brought these two together, and The Bandit was a great hit. Actually, it was a funny mishmash, realism and melodrama. But the two protagonists actually work very well. You can see there's a chemistry between them, and that was a really important step on Dino's part, which showed he had an understanding of the way film stardom was working, but also the way it was changing in this new context. What could carry over from the past, what couldn't, what needed to be invented.
One of the more famous members of the Italian star system was Silvana Mangano. She and Dino married in 1949. He then used her in several films, had invested a lot of energy into developing her career even further. Do you know what he planned for her, what his ambitions were for her?
I think we can say that Silvana Mangano was Dino's great project. He was making the film Bitter Rice, which was a film directed by a communist director, Giuseppe De Santis, which had a political agenda to it. But it was set in the rice fields. It was conceived as a documentary to start with about these seasonal workers, women who worked in the rice fields of northern Italy for several weeks every year. But it evolved from a documentary beginning into a melodrama. So you've got, again, this sort of hybrid element of things with proven audience appeal and some of the more sort of newer features that concern with workers and problems of the post-war period. Now, the film had as its centre a character who was a modern girl who was undertaking this seasonal work, but who was also in love with American movies, boogie-woogie music, comics and photo romances, who liked chewing gum and so on. So she was, in a way, emblematic of the period. And the question of, how that role should be played, how it should be cast, was one that the director and Dino discussed at length, and they did extensive auditions. And Silvana Mangano was a model, in fact. I mean, she worked for a fashion house, and she presented herself to the audition, was rejected, in fact, at first, but then was later spotted, when she wasn't sort of dressed up and made up, by the director, who saw her differently and said, you're the one, and discussed that decision with Dino, who agreed. They both agreed that the film needed a newcomer. It needed a new face. And I think as the film was being made, and it had a long production history, everybody involved with it realized that Silvana Mangano had extraordinary potential. She had a real sort of screen charisma, even though she had no background in acting at all. And in fact, her character really sort of blossoms in the film, takes it over almost, and became extremely popular. And she led the marketing of the film, which became a big sort of international hit. Dino was completely smitten by her and married her very shortly after filming finished. And then he decided to build her up, to make her a key new star of this post-war cinema that was gradually expanding, gradually growing stronger. And so every project that she made, and unlike a lot of the other people who went into cinema in the post-war period, she didn't make lots and lots of films. Each film was very, very carefully selected, and the casting was taken great care of, and the marketing too. Now, interestingly, after The Bandit, Amedeo Nazari, who we mentioned, the sort of Italian Clark Gable, hadn't found much work and had gone off to Argentina. Dino brought him back from Argentina and put him together with Silvana Mangano in her follow-up film to Bitter Ice, which was The Wolf of the Sila. And it was set in the Italian South in this rather rustic environment, a long way from the sort of labour troubles that were depicted in Bitter Ice. And again, they forged a sort of a melodrama in which Silvana Mangano is the love interest divided between Amedeo Nazari, who's this sort of older man, and his son. And again, it was a big success. And I think virtually every one of her films was a success. And it was clear that Dino was building her up not just as a national star, but a star with possible international appeal. So she became crucial, really, to his plans for becoming a major player in Italian film production.
Do you think that Dino mixing his personal and working relationship with Silvana would have used as a template for other Italian producers?
Well, it certainly became so. I mean, I think there are probably two cases of producer-actress marriages which people know. One is Dino De Laurentiis and Silvana Mangano. And certainly, Silvana was a rather sort of shy person. She actually was a rather reluctant star in some respects, but nonetheless, she assisted Dino. She went to a lot of, international festivals and so on, and became not just his protege, but also his accomplice, I would say, in building up his film empire. The other case that everybody knows about is Sophie Loren's marriage with Carlo Ponti. And Ponti and De Laurentiis, of course, worked closely together from the late 40s. They began in Lux Film, then broke away and formed a company of their own, which lasted up until 1955, when they each went their own way. But certainly Ponti copied De Laurentiis, I would say. He could see that Dino was creating a star of his own, whose career he would determine, he would make the major decisions about, and Ponti wanted a similar figure, and he chose Sophie Loren, who had a rather similar background to Silvana Mangano. She was an ordinary girl, no acting experience at all, who took part in beauty contests and made, photo romance magazines, but then was taken and groomed and put into Italian films and then international productions. What's probably not so well known is that a series of other producers then did the same thing. Franco Cristaldi took Claudia Cardinale and modelled her into his, the house star, I would say, of his company, Vides. Alfredo Bini, who is probably not a very well-known figure internationally, but was quite important in making films of a number of Italian art directors, from Francesco Rosi through to Pier Paolo Pasolini. He had a relationship with Rossana Schiaffino, who was another star of the period. And there are one or two others as well. So this did become a sort of model. And one has to say, well, why? Why did it become a model? And I think the answer is twofold. First of all, Italian cinema, even as it was growing and expanding through the 40s and 50s, didn't really have a studio system. Stars didn't really have agents. They were, free to choose what films they made, and the producers really had to sort of cast on a film by film basis. So the one way that was available to a producer to anchor a star to his interest was to marry her. So I think it was a way of, sort of making sure a star's career, that no decision about what the star did could be taken without the producer say so, because the star was the wife. So in a way there was a sort of family dimension that came into it. I think the second important thing is that stars could be used to build projects. Stars sort of carried a certain weight. They helped projects come to fruition. And certainly if we look at Dino, the way he moved forward with Silvana Mangano, he, for example, made the first international production in Italy, which featured an American star, which was Kirk Douglas, and this was the film Ulysses. He brought in Kirk Douglas. This was not a co-production. This was an entirely De Laurentiis and Ponti production. And he brought in Kirk Douglas to star with Silvana Mangano. So we can see already, long before he went to the United States, he's thinking in international terms and using Silvana Mangano as his great protege, great star, to build those projects.
Do you think that there are, or do you know if there are any other female or male stars that he worked with the same way that he worked with Silvana Mangano in Italy during his time there?
There's no case of him investing so much energy in another star, but he did have one other project which actually didn't really get off the ground, and this concerned the exiled Iranian princess or queen, I suppose, the wife of the Shah of Iran, Soraya, who was repudiated by the Shah because she was unable to bear children. And she arrived in Italy in exile and was a sort of celebrity of the time, the sad princess Soraya she was. And Dino thought she had screen potential. She was a very elegant woman. You would see, if you see photographs of her, you would think, you could see that there's something there, which Dino saw in her, and he put her through a screen test and actually made a film with her, which is called Three Faces. But it was a flop, because although she had some of the required qualities, she looks a bit sort of flat and shallow on screen. She doesn't really carry over very well. And whereas Silvana and Sophia Loren, managed to develop their capacities as an actress, Soraya, didn't really seem to be able to do that, certainly not within the space of a film. So that was a project which was almost sort of dead on the drawing board, I would say. Otherwise, there were a number of male actors who Dino used. Certainly there was the great comedian Totò, hardly known abroad, but who was huge box office in Italy. And Dino, together with Carlo Ponti, they made a lot of films with this Neapolitan actor. And he was loved, in particular, by the popular audiences in the south of Italy. And they made a lot of money with Totò, which then allowed them to invest in more ambitious projects. So Nazari, again, who we mentioned, appears a number of times through the 1950s in films. There's another great comedian, Alberto Sordi, was also an important figure for Dino through the late 50s and early 1960s. So there's a clear attempt, really, to create a sort of star system and exploit the stars that are going over well with the public in order to ensure a certain predictability, so that films were not just hit and miss every time, but you had a certain sort of continuity so you could plan strategically.
We already know that Dino loved American films, and he moved to America from Italy. When he came to the U.S., did he want to use the same approach with stars that he did in Italy?
Well, I think we can say that certainly Dino was always attentive to stars and the sort of opportunities and challenges that stars presented. But of course, when he started getting involved in American cinema, he was dealing with a context in which there already was a star system, a very well-established one, as you were saying, going back to the 1920s, and a very different sort of way of working than there had been in Italy. So I think we can certainly, find some names, some actors whose careers Dino helped promote and accelerate. There are very few cases, I think, where we can say that he actually sort of created a star almost from nothing. I mean, if we were to take two examples of stars that he, if not completely created, certainly made a big contribution to their careers. One, I would say, is Jessica Lange, of course, who from King Kong. She was unknown before that, and this becomes, a worldwide name immediately after that. Then went on to do different and more challenging films. But that's really her, the moment in which she comes to recognition. And the other one, I suppose, is Arnold Schwarzenegger with Conan the Barbarian in 1982, which was sort of produced by Dino and his daughter Raffaella. Because Dino had eventually, four children with Silvana Mangano, and Raffaella went into film production. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger had made a handful of films before. Pumping Iron was a sort of bodybuilding film which had brought him some recognition, but they were always sort of supporting character roles. Conan the Barbarian is the first film which he has the leading role. And it was a big box office success about this sort of, warrior seeking to exact revenge for the murder of his parents and family. And it made a lot of money. I mean, I think it had a budget of about 20 million and made about sort of 70 overall. So it gave rise to a follow-up, a sequel, and then was sort of remade much later as well. So I think we can say they are two figures whose careers prospered thanks, or got really going thanks to Dino. Another one might say is Jane Fonda. I don't think she ever looked back at Barbarella with great fondness, because immediately afterwards she made They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, which was a film that got a lot of critical acclaim, and I'm sure she looks back on that much more fondly. But Barbarella turned her into an international sex symbol. I think certainly internationally, people recognized her thanks to that film. And another actor one might say is Al Pacino, who, Serpico got him an Oscar nomination. He won a Golden Globe for Best Actor 1974 with that film. One could say, of course, immediately before he'd made The Godfather and Scarface, so he was by no means an unknown quantity at that time. But nonetheless, Serpico was a film that I think underlined his qualities, which showed his range, certainly far more than The Godfather did, and helped his subsequent career. So I would say if we look at Dino in the United States, we're looking much more at somebody who's sort of intervening, trying to use stars that are there, maybe sort of choose his names, promote certain people, but it's a very different sort of approach to the work of star creation and star building that he undertook in Italy.
Do you think that these stars that he created felt beholden to him in any way for their success and their ongoing success? I don't remember seeing any of these actors in a second Dino film.
Well, that's very interesting. I think, very few actors, I think, feel beholden to producers. Some producers, on the other hand, get very offended when stars don't show gratitude. One big producer who always demanded displays of gratitude was David O. Selznick. And the Selznick archives, which contain sort of vast correspondence, show how he was pleased with Ingrid Bergman because she would express gratitude to him in public. And he was furious with Alida Valli, an Italian star who he groomed and took over as a successor to Greta Garbo and Ingrid Bergman. She refused to express gratitude to him in interviews. And, this drove him crazy. I don't think Dino really ever expected much gratitude. I think he occupied the public scene himself. He understood films were a business. I don't think, apart from Silvana, that he invested heavily in the careers of any stars, certainly not making a personal emotional investment. With Silvana, one can say she was his biggest project, but relations were not easy. Of course, the couple divorced in the end, but even before that, there were tensions. I think Silvana had emerged in Bitter Ice as a great sort of sex symbol, and that was how Dino initially thought of her career, but she didn't like that self-image at all, and completely changed her physical look, going much thinner, becoming much more sort of elegant, adopting a rather sort of aloof posture. And by the time you get to the 1967 film, The Witches, which is an episode film, a sort of thing that was quite typical for Italian cinema at the time, a film consisting of 4 or 5 episodes, each one made by a different director. You can see the very first episode, Silvana Mangano is playing this aloof star, and she speaks disparagingly of her husband. Now, she's not playing herself, supposedly, but one can't help but look at that first episode, which was directed by Luchino Visconti, as a sort of marking of her distance from Dino, the producer. She's somebody who sort of, is imprisoned in an image and is trying to escape from an image in that episode. So, I don't think Silvana ever expressed any gratitude. If anything, there was a sort of resentment, and her reputation as the reluctant star meant sometimes she had to be dragged into film productions. I unfortunately, I don't think, maybe Dino deserved a few more expressions of gratitude than he got, but I don't think he actually received very many.
Well, this is really an interesting talk about the stars Dino worked with, the ones that he created. The studio system, the star system now is totally gone. Actors move from job to job wherever they get the best deal. And so I guess that's it for the star system all around the world.
Well, it is in a way. And of course, Dino, perhaps we can say with some of his blockbuster films, he anticipated the disappearance of the star, that the film became the project, it was sold on the basis of its scale, its budget, its theme, and King Kong, for example, it's sold on the basis of the ape, not Jessica Lange or anybody else. I think, if we look at the Avengers movies today, again, it's the franchise is more important than the stars. And we can say Dino sort of anticipated that because he made Flash Gordon in 1980. Barbarella is adapted from a comic. He made Danger Diabolic, which is adapted from an Italian comic. So he too had an interest in this type of film where you'd already got something which made the film marketable, regardless of who was appearing in it.
Always about the story with Dino, which is so great. Thanks, Stephen. We'll talk to you again next time, unless there's something else you want to talk about.
No, I think we've covered everything, Jana. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll check you next time.